the communist movement has historically been feminist, and yet Hinkle appears to be not.
No, that's not true, okay? The communist movement has not been historically feminist because the word feminism has been routinely denounced and critiqued by every single communist state in the 20th century. The thinkers of the woman's question rejected feminism as bourgeois. Feminism as a phenomena was rejected in the Warsaw Pact as a bourgeois phenomena that was coming from the West. Now, did communists maintain a notion of women's equality? Of course they did. But that's not the same as feminism. Feminism is a very specific movement that does not intrinsically unite the woman's struggle with the class struggle as one and the same thing, as bounded up as one and the same. And the reason that's important is because feminism carries a lot more baggage. Feminism, for example, tries to overturn almost all of the norms of gender relationships and critique those on the basis of the patriarchy or whatever. Communists rejected that. Communists didn't reject all gender norms. They associated certain habits and cultural norms as part of the capitalist past, sure. For example, prostitution, the sex industry, so on. And also the notion that women were the property of their husbands and couldn't pursue their own careers. But in general, this is a terrible truth, I'm sure, and I can show you the proof right now. Communists also did associate womanhood with motherhood. Fundamentally, I can pull up Lenin himself doing this. So let's see. Lenin, this is his interview with Clara Zetkin, the woman's question. So look at Lenin talking about, for example, what he thinks women should be doing as far as the woman's question and so on. And his rejection of this kind of free love nonsense, right? So Lenin, he's here rejecting the way the young people are rejecting all sexual morality. He says the youth movement is attacked with the disease of modernity, right? And they can easily contribute to overexcitement and exaggeration in sexual life. You must fight against that. There are not a few points of contact between the women's and youth movements. Our women comrades must work together systematically with the youth. That is a continuation, an extension, and exaltation of motherliness from the individual to the social sphere. And all the awakening of social life and activity of women should be encouraged, so they should be allowed to pursue careers. They should be allowed to participate in public life. But even in the way Lenin frames the liberation of women from the strictly private context of family life to the social sphere, he calls it an extension and exaltation of motherliness. So women can take on motherly roles in social contexts to help nurture better societal social environments. So that was the type of rhetoric Lenin used, for example. That is not a feminist type of rhetoric. Okay, because according to feminists, that's a patriarchal logic. You can disagree with Lenin, that's fine. You can say Lenin was a product of his time and he was backward and we're more progressive now. I don't care. I have a problem with framing such a notion as inherently reactionary or antithetical with Marxism.
Not just misogynistic, but a radical, extreme misogynist, and we can assume by the fact that Hinkle remains on the executive board, and that seemingly no one in the party takes any issue with this, that this—
Yeah, but how in practice is Jackson a radical misogynistic in practice? Notice I emphasize that word, in practice. Evo Morales said that he is the type of feminist who likes to tell sexist jokes. Is he a misogynist? In terms of policy, he literally calls himself a feminist. Yet on a personal level, he says misogynistic, inflammatory, and offensive things about women. So Jackson clearly has said offensive and inflammatory things about women in his personal capacity. How does that make him, on a social and ideological level, a misogynist? That conflates the principle of politics with personal banter and nonsense, personal humor, personal discourse, right? That is mainly done to make yourself more relatable on a parasocial level, more likable on an individual level as a personality. But when it comes to the institutional question of the women's question, never once to us as the executive board that we should advocate for stripping women of their independent right to vote. And the absurdity of this notion reaches its high point upon examination of the fact that if you read our party constitution, when we are given unlimited power to determine the role of women on an institutional level, which is within our party, what have we done? We have institutionalized an absolute principle of women's equality. In practice, We have institutionalized the equality of our women comrades. Where is the actual misogyny in practice? When have in our own party women been discriminated against because they're women? But because Jackson engaged in inflammatory, unserious rhetoric years before the founding of the party that is somehow misogynistic, that our party as a whole is misogynistic, that is completely warped, bizarre, illogical nonsense. Just meticulously think about and break down the chain of reasoning that is being employed by Brandon here. And you tell me if it holds up to the bare minimal scrutiny of criticism.
This is a permitted opinion in the ACP. In fact, here's a woman named Slava who is in the Politburo of the ACP, appearing to affirm these views. She doesn't appear to be bothered by Hinkle's views on women because she seems to largely agree. So again, these views...
Hold on, but we did not order Slava to say this. Slava was expressing her personal view. This is her personal view about women in general. It's her own. It's not, where has our party institutionalized this view? What's crazy? Even what she said here was the same thing Lenin said. Right here. No, not here. That was what I had linked before in his conversation with Clara Zetkin, where he talked about the exaltation and extension of motherliness from the individual realm to the social realm. So this is not the same thing as saying you don't think women should vote. That's not the same thing. Also, Slava is allowed to have her own opinion. We didn't restrict Slava's ability to voice her views on this question. Slava is one of our female comrades within the party who is entitled to her own view on the matter. You're effectively saying that women should not be able to have opinions on women? What are you even saying at this point?
In fact, here's a woman named Slava who is in the Politburo of the ACP, appearing to affirm these views. She doesn't appear to be bothered by Hinkle's views on women because she seems to largely agree. So again, these views are entirely accepted within the ACP. I'll give another example of a...
These views have no existence within the ACP. They're not accepted within the party because they don't exist within the party. There is no discourse within the party that advocates for women to have less rights than men on an institutional or political level.